It is again my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Now, I was one of those little kids. I was so small when I was young that I didn't get to go to school till I was 7 years old because my parents wouldn't let me go to school because I was too small. And I grew up in a blue-collar town where you had to fight, as everybody worked in the steel mills. Everybody was uneducated, just about, and so I started school late. And I knew I was smart because I could read when I went to school. I don't know how I learned that, but I could read when I got there. And I thought I was smart all the way through school until I went to the University of Chicago to get my PhD. Then I met some really smart people, like Barbara Sizemore. And I have been humble from that day forward. Barbara Sizemore picked up a book in Latin and started reading it when she was in high school. It had no instruction in it at all. Barbara Sizemore went to Northwestern University in the days when you could not live on the campus of Northwestern University, and graduated from Northwestern University summa cum laude in classics when she was 19. Okay? That's when I found out what it meant to be really smart. Okay? We were the only two African Americans in a special program at the University of Chicago when I first met her, and it gave me the appropriate humility about learning and about brightness from then on. Barbara earned her PhD at the University of Chicago, as I did. She had distinguished career as an educator in elementary and secondary education. She taught everything at every level. She was an elementary principal, one of the outstanding ones in Chicago, and against my advice, took a tough high school in Chicago and turned it around. The superintendent promised her that he was going to give her the resources that she needed to do it. I told her he was lying. I was right. She took the school anyway, and she turned it around and all of that. She became superintendent in Washington, D.C. She finished one phase of her career at Pitt, where she became a department chairman, a professor in several departments, and director of research, and thought she was going to retire and write books. However, the president of DePaul University in Chicago knew about Barbara and talked her out of retirement, told her to come and take over the deanship of the College of Education, and he would back her because their number one priority was to improve public education in Chicago. Barbara came out, she took it, she just retired from the second phase of her career and is getting ready to start the third phase of her career in education now. She is a tireless advocate for poor people. She is a tireless advocate for black children and youth getting the kind of quality education they need. And it is my great pleasure to present to you my friend and colleague and one of the brightest people I have ever met in my life, Barbara Sizemore.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It is now 5 minutes to 10. I was supposed to start at 9:40. I'm a university professor programmed for 50 minutes. I'm going to do my best not to do that. There are certain characteristics of the African American community which have been consistent throughout my adult years. Last year, I celebrated my 50th year as a teacher in the United States of America. Thank you. These consistencies are: racism, or the belief in white supremacy, has been relentless and persistent throughout these 50 years. The absence of unity among African Americans in their pursuit of freedom and equality has been consistent. And the belief in education and God as the preferred means for that pursuit has steadily diminished. When I was a young girl in the 1930s and 1940s, African Americans, we were called Negroes or colored people then, had strong convictions about the pursuit of freedom and equality, which Reverend Flake has talked about this morning from his parents. My parents, born in the vicious years of Jim Crow, 1905 and 1907, when Negroes were lynched, and Mary McLeod Bethune once thought there was a chance for President Roosevelt to pass an anti-lynching law, but it never happened. But my parents fought against apartheid and Jim Crow because they believed in God and education. They believed in that old song, I shall not be moved. I shall not be moved. Just like a tree that's standing by the water, I shall not be moved. And they had faith in God and the future. As you know, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. And this faith bolsters self-confidence and lifts self-esteem, but more than anything else, it nourishes the human spirit. And friends, it pays to be intelligent. Nobody wants to be dumb. But it is the human spirit that overcomes obstacles, like poverty, like racism, and sexism. There are 5 levers of power in a capitalist democracy: God, dollars, votes, knowledge, and guns. African Americans have all of these. And what keeps us from being successful is the lack of a unity among us to persist and stand like the tree by the water. I call this a degeneration of our spirit, and we must get it back. In 1997, Bernie Watson states in his book, Colored Black Negro Chasing the American Dream, says this: a different reality has set in at this writing. The African American community is now well represented in positions of power and responsibility. Look at us, look at us, look at us. Yet problems remain. Simultaneously, the country appears to be tired of confronting problems, and many political leaders seem eager to return to the good old days of intact families, quiet small towns, good education, jobs for everyone, and perfect harmony. These good old days never existed. That dimly remembered past is only a fantasy. The opposition, end of quote, the opposition to racism has caved in, as Bernie tells us in his book. Racism through Jim Crow relegated Negroes to poverty then as now, and preventing poverty will require redefinitions and a redistribution of opportunity for all people. These are the future challenges of public education. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have a little bit of control over public education. We have absolutely no control over private education. None. The reason we do not understand this is because we do not understand capitalism. Look, we say and teach our children that we fight wars for democracy. Stop telling this lie to your children. We don't fight wars for democracy, we fight wars for capitalism. That is what is the essence of the American dream. The dollars have in God we trust on them, but it's not God we spend. It's not God we save. Your human spirit is not in your bank account. I'm not against dollars, don't get me wrong. But that's not where your heart is. And where your heart is where your treasure is. Right? You can have money and be poor. Oh yeah, I know people who got plenty of money. It's in a $40,000 Lexus in the garage. It's in $10,000 fur coats, $20,000 diamond rings. But money is important. And if you're going to make it in the United States, if we're going to make it as a group in the United States of America, we've got to better understand capitalism and what it means, because that is the essence. I want to thank Bernie Watson and Mona Risco for recommending me to participate in this very important conference, because the future of public education must be responsive to the needs of capitalism now that capitalism is the dominant economic system in the world. And you must understand that capitalism means that it's an economic system which guarantees that the goods and services, the ownership and distribution of goods and services is private. That's privately owned. It's privately owned. It's privately owned. It's privately owned. If I own the company, my son does not have to take a test to be vice president. The future of public education must be responsive to capitalism. And if we as a people are going to survive, we must be responsive to capitalism, or we will die in the prison system which has been constructed to contain African American men, especially now that they are armed. The future of public education must also be responsive to the changing demographics in the United States. Oh, Reverend Flake is so right. Let your children learn to speak Spanish. For God's sake, let your children learn to speak Spanish. They're going to have to talk to Spanish-speaking people. Some of these Spanish-speaking people are black. Puerto Ricans are citizens, and many Mexican Americans are. Now, the chief goal of capitalism is to make a profit by any means necessary. So these 4 tiers that Reverend Flake talked about in public schools are going to just merely replicate themselves in private schools. They're going to be the schools that cost $20,000. So if the state gives you a $7,000 voucher, you got to come up with $13,000 to get in that high-tier school. Then there are going to be schools that cost you $15,000. Then you got to come up with $8,000. Then there are going to be schools that cost $12,000. Then you got to come up with $5,000. And then there are going to be schools that cost $7,000 and less. Guess who's going to be in those schools? No, ladies and gentlemen, we made a big mistake in desegregation. I tried hard to keep it from happening, but it couldn't happen. Oh, people get caricatures of me. Some of you are old enough to remember. I had my big bandana around my head, and here comes Aunt Jabarbara. I know you don't, some of you are too young, you don't remember that. But what I kept trying to tell people is we can't buy into a desegregation policy that says that all black is all bad. We can't do it. We can't do it. We can't do it. And we cannot buy into a voucher system that says that you get $7,000 and you buy what you can. Can't buy it. Can't do it. Can't do it. We can't do it. We can't do it. We got to think this thing through carefully. Oh, I agree with Reverend Flake that we need to debate this issue. I'm not here to be an apologist for public schools, but I do want to tell you that public schools can be better. They can be better. Now, generally, as African Americans, we're very confused about the economic system and capitalism. We don't talk too much about how you make money and less about how you keep it. But that doesn't mean that we can't learn. It doesn't mean that we can't learn. And it doesn't mean that we can't teach our children. The main areas of concern in private and public education for African Americans are accountability. That is, how do we know that every American knows what she or she should know? How do we know that every school is reaching that goal? We call that accreditation. How do we know that school employees are reaching this goal? That is certification, experience. You got a lot of private schools and parochial schools in Chicago that hire people who are not even certified to teach. Governance. Who should rule and how? Who should determine what is taught to whom and how? Curriculum. What should every American know? How should every American be taught? And finance. How should schools be financed and who pays? Those are the questions. Last, how are teachers recruited and principals and people who work in public schools? Ron Edmonds said in the 1970s, we know everything we need to know to teach all of the children of all of the people, especially if their education is important to us. I stand here before you to tell you there are mountains of data, ladies and gentlemen, mountains of data of public schools where people like you and me are in them teaching our children, and where our children are passing these tests, as my grandmother used to say. Let me tell you about some of them that I'm recently worked with. Last year, Kelman Corporate Community School. This was a school that the corporations took over. They took it over. It was a private school funded by Joseph Kelman Corporation, and they couldn't teach the kids to learn, so they gave it back to the public school system. Hello? Last year, Kelman Corporate Community School reached the 50th percentile in mathematics, increasing from 40th percentile in 1995 and the 51st percentile in reading on ITBS from the 25th percentile in 1995. It was the first school that we worked with at DePaul in the school achievement structure to do so. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring these all-black, all-Hispanic schools up from the 9th and 10th percentile to the 50th percentile. Just make them normal schools, because we believe the children in them are normal children. Spencer Elementary School, this is a big school, continues improving 5 years in a row from 9.7%. In 1992, ladies and gentlemen, only 9.7% of these African-American children performed at the national norm on the Iowa Test of Basic Skills in Reading. They are now at the 21st percentile in reading and at the 29th in mathematics. And what's different about Spencer, ladies and gentlemen, is there are 1,400 kids there on the same campus in 2 schools. Now, people tell you you got to have small schools to do this trick. Bunk. You just got to have competent, committed people. Michelle Clark Middle School. Michelle Clark Middle School just escaped probationary status this year, coming from 9.7% in reading in 1992 to 22.3% in 98. And from 13.4% in mathematics in 92 to 21.2% in 98. Carver Primary School went from 6.3% in 95 to 35% in 98 in reading, and from 26% to 65% in mathematics in 1998. Emmett, 13% in 94, 25.1% in 95 in reading, 16% in mathematics, and 32% now. Mays Academy, Overton. I mean, I could give you all these schools. What's the matter with us that we do not realize that we can do this? We know how to do this. The thing is, you gotta make the people earning the paychecks do it. You gotta make them do it. In 1998, Overton was the most successful elementary school, rising from 25.9% in reading from 9.8 and 39.1% in mathematics from 12.5. It's more difficult to make this happen in high schools because, as many people know, a lot of these African-American high school students have developed an attitude. This attitude is interesting to examine, ladies and gentlemen, because it's an attitude which is developed because of our neglect. Because these students know we don't care whether they learn anything or not. And so this attitude protects them from our disdain and from our contempt. In the high schools, Westinghouse Vocational continues to lead our high schools in growth and development at 17.7%. But you got to remember, it came from 4. And 20.8% in mathematics, which is up from 14. African-American children can do whatever we want them to do. They can do it. All you need is a teacher who knows what he or she is teaching. Look, ladies and gentlemen, we know that African-American children fail algebra tests because they have this tremendous problem understanding divisibility and infinity. If your teacher doesn't know what the devil those are, how can he or she help this child overcome this disability? Right? You can teach divisibility by combining information about fractions, decimals, percentages, and teach them all through ratio. There is not an algebra problem that you could design that does not conform to one of three rules. Association, commutation, and association, commutation. This is the worst thing about aging. I really hate this. Distribution. I hate this. I don't mind getting old, but the loss of my memory is the worst thing that can happen to you. Private schools unregulated by the state have problems. They can raise tuition, select their students, suspend or expel students, recruit uncertified teachers, reject evaluations, and actually, there is no way of knowing whether the students can even read. It was not until the chief executive officer of the Chicago Public Schools made the private schools that are in the Chicago Public School system, we have a lot of those. These are schools that are set up by people, they're public schools, but teachers have run them or whatever. We have a lot of those. But nobody knew what the kids could do, so when Paul Vallis made them all take tests, guess what we found out? Kids couldn't read them either. That's interesting. Sizemore was in, did you all read this in the New York Times yesterday? Now, Sizemore runs the Coalition of Essential Schools. We have about 10 of them in Chicago. Can't anybody read them either. But, ladies and gentlemen, he gets a lot of good press. And a lot of African-American people believe that these Coalition of Essential Schools is the answer to our problems. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, a real good indicator of whether or not a program is meeting the needs of African-American children is to first find out, can they read? If they can't read, dump it and find something else. Okay, there's a mountain of data, ladies and gentlemen, a mountain of data that shows that direct instruction pays for children who need structure. Remember Reverend Flake said they put on their uniform? Hello. They put on their uniform and come to the school, okay. A lot of African-American children need structure. They need structure because the whole environment is unstructured for them. You know, when you look in the mirror, it looks like you're looking at yourself, right? But the things are reversed. But it looks good, okay? Okay, remember that about our children. They come into this racist environment which tries to obscure the fact that white supremacy is the highest value, next to money and sex. And they're looking at this and wondering why it's not making sense to them. Okay, so they're structured for their own destruction. All right, that's what I call unstructured, because anything that does not develop the human being is not structured for that human being. Okay, let me hurry up. What can you do about all of this? Well, one thing you can do about all this is know what you want in the school. Now, the main thing that Ron Edmonds left with us was that if you want to have a school that works, you've got to have an instructional leader who knows what he or she is doing and who can run a school. You got to have somebody who's going to say, the buck stops here. Like, if you got a problem, I know what to do about it, and I'm going to help you out with that. Okay, you got to know that. And you've got to know that that person is doing that. Now, if you've got a Clarence Thomas type leader, you got to get rid of him or her. Look, people are entitled to believe whatever they want to believe. They are. This is a free country. I don't want to take the First Amendment away from him. He can believe whatever he wants to believe. And he can do whatever he wants to do. This is a free country. Thank God for many blessings. But If the leader of your school is not bringing about a good instructional program for your children, you have to get rid of that person. I don't care if he or she is black. If it's a white person who can do it, hire him or her quickly. Got to have strong instructional leadership. You got to have an academic press emphasizing the mastery of basic skills, reading and mathematics, and consistently monitor it. Our kids have to be monitored. They're accustomed to it. They will ask you for it. And if you don't give them a program, they will give one to you. You've got to have high expectations, safety and security, a climate conducive to learning. We learned all of this in 1977 from Ron Edmonds. Remember that. We already know this. This is not something you've heard for the first time. You already know this. Because the first thing you want to do then is choose a strong instructional leader. Okay? Now, after that, what do you want this person to do? You want this person to know how your children are performing. You want him or her to know what are the pitfalls on these tests for our children. I've already told you one. In mathematics, it's infinity and divisibility. There's no reason in the world why African-American children cannot be taught infinity in kindergarten. There's no reason in the world why we have to take just the positive line and not introduce them to the negative line. You can have these children learn that zero intercepts the negative from the positive, and they can at least begin understanding it in kindergarten. Our lines only go positive, so whoa, when you get to ninth grade, you finally find out there's some negative numbers. What the devil do these mean? And then you have to integrate them into it. That's infinity. All right. I already talked to you about divisibility. Reading is the most complicated subject for our children because we speak Ebonics. Now, I know there are a lot of, this is a generational problem. I know there are a lot of African Americans who deny that they speak Ebonics. In fact, I interviewed one teacher, and he told me that he would never teach Ebonics in his class. This was an African American. And I said to him, I said, oh, that's interesting. I said, then you don't teach your life for me ain't been no crystal star. It done had tax in it. I said, you don't teach that right. He said, oh, well, I do teach Langston Hughes. I said, oh, then you teach Ebonics. So he said, you're trying to confuse an issue. I said, oh, okay, clear me up. Or as Maulana Karenga says, rescue me. He had a hard time and told me that I'd already made up my mind, so it wasn't any sense for him to talk to me anymore about it. I knew that I had won that argument. Look, I speak Ebonics to my father. He would be concerned if I didn't. All right. Yeah, I tell my father, now I'm fitting to do that. Because he likes to give me orders, you know, and I said, okay, I'm fitting to do that. But I don't say I'm fitting to do it at DePaul. I'm what you call a switcher. My daughter and I talk black English all the way to the meeting. When we get to the meeting, we switch to standard English. I don't feel any less self-esteem when I'm speaking Ebonics to my father than I do speaking standard English at DePaul. They're both of equal value to me. One I speak with the people I love, the other one I speak with the people who don't love me. I'm kidding with that. I'm kidding. Our children have to learn to be switchers. It's our obligation to teach them that. It's our obligation. Look. This whole language thing does not always fit our children. Does that mean we need to abandon it? No. But we have to have some kind of phonics program with it to teach our children how to read. Once they learn how to read, then you can use whole language to teach them to read to learn. I mean, everything has its place in this world, all right? Now, if you know that children are having problems sounding out words, you have to teach them what those 44 sounds are. Look, for Spanish-speaking children, the vowels are very constant. A is always A. O is always O. U is always U. I is always E. All right? O is always O. Always, always. So if you want a Spanish-speaking child to say FAT, you've got to teach him that that A says ah. Otherwise, he's going to say FAT, and the African-American kids are going to fall out of the seat laughing. Now, African-American children have the reverse. African-American children have too many short vowel sounds for standard English. That's why so many of us say, ask me a question. Now, look, ladies and gentlemen, look, let me hurry on here. If we know these things about our children, why don't we teach them what they should know? What is our problem? What is our problem? What is our problem? African-American children need to learn English grammar. So do Spanish-speaking children. The language is not the most consistent language in the world. The short vowel sounds are crazy. They don't obey any rules. And therefore, you've got to help these children understand this deficiency in standard English. If you don't, they will give you what they have. And they will continue to give it to you until you teach them otherwise. So if you don't want me to say, ask me the question, you have to teach me. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the last thing I want to close with, and I didn't save this for last because it's least, is that you've got to teach children from their own experiences and their own culture. Look, African-American culture in this country did not begin with enslavement. It began with the exploration period. The city of Chicago was founded by Jean-Baptiste Dupont du Sable. He was not a slave. He was an explorer. All right? There was the African period of exploration. Look, ladies and gentlemen, those stone heads at Tres Zapotes, at La Venta, and at San Fernando in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico are Africans. I don't care what kind of lies people are telling. Go down there and look for yourself, or look at pictures of them. If these people with these big fat noses and big lips and diencephalous heads were walking around the streets of Philadelphia, wouldn't anybody be calling them white or Indian? Look at them yourself. Make sense out of this. Just use common sense. There are only two places in the world where there are pyramids, the Yucatan Peninsula and Egypt. I mean, for God's sakes, why is white supremacy so important to us that we are willing to distort the historical evidence to fit the needs of it? And why are we arguing for Western civilization, which is just a masquerade for white supremacy? Bernie gave us a lesson about Philadelphia the other night that I'm sure a lot of Philadelphians don't know, because it is omitted, discarded, obscured, demeaned. Listen, not valued. Absolutely, Ike. To infuse the culture of African American students into the curriculum, the teacher must be informed of material which has been omitted from the curriculum about their life, history, and culture. And one way to do this is to start with Egypt as the African country similar to Rome or Greece for European Americans. I am so tired of seeing African Americans on television say, well, the Greeks say it. I said, oh, for God's sake, would somebody educate this brother? Look, all roads lead to Egypt. And for God's sake, when you talk to your children about it, please put Egypt back in Africa. It never left. Yeah. It never left. Talk about the history of African Americans in the United States. Please start with the African exploration. There has to be some explanation for these African heads in the Olmec culture of Mexico. There has to be some explanation. They didn't just drop down here from Mars. Look, there has to be some explanation of the African village that was described by Balboa in his diary when he landed in Panama. There has to be some explanation. There has to be some explanation for what happened to the 199 ships of Abubakar II of Mali. There has to be some explanation. There has to be some explanation. So what am I saying? I'm saying that the African American culture has to be integrated into the curriculum. It has to be taught, and it has to be stressed in order for African American children to understand that they too are of worth and have contributed to the quality of life on this planet. Lastly, we got to worry over this special ed thing. We got to worry over it. We have to worry over it. Look, there's no such thing as a homogeneous group. God didn't make one, and you can't either. Any group you get together is going to be heterogeneous. Now, you can take all the short-haired people in this room, put them over there on that side, and the long-haired people over here, and you have a heterogeneous group of short-haired people and a heterogeneous group of long-haired people. There's no such thing. So why are we using such imprecise language to describe what we do to children? Why are we doing that? And then call ourselves educated and scientists, some of us. Stop using it. It's a meaningless word. It only applies to milk. Any group that you want to make, and you have to make a decision as to how you want this group to be formed so you can teach it whatever you want to teach it. Last, instruction must have these signal characteristics. Teach what is worth knowing. If it's not worth knowing, stop teaching it. I have never used one non-aprile with the sugar salt of the truth to march and pass it to the wrath and bathe in every vein and swish liqueur, of which thereto engendered is the fluor. I never used it. Meet the needs of the students. Teach to high standards. Motivate, inspire, excite. Nobody likes to sit down and listen to a dumb, dull person. Engage the student in doing. Use materials that are current and meet many learning styles. Relate every lesson to the culture and life of the student. Provide more time and more people to students who fall behind. Push in is better than pull out, and add on is better than both. Stop putting these pull out programs in here. Add on gives both. Push in gives more people. Add on gives more people and more time. Provide a syllabus. Know what you're teaching. Hire teachers who know what they are teaching. Stop hiring dumb people to teach our children in the school. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Look, if you want schools to change, you must do something now. In the present, people talk about the past. People talk about the future. This is the now, the present, the now. You and I have to make public schools better. Private schools have neither the capacity nor the capitalistic design to solve this problem. We need to improve public schools, and we need to do it now.